listeners! Welcome to the What is Nerd podcast. I am Tyler Dietz. With me is Nick Grant. What's up, Nick?
Hey man, not a whole lot. Just happy to be here as always. And let's talk about your boy Soups.
If you didn't know already, this episode is about Soup, aka Superman. This is our first episode covering Superman, so we're doing a couple of origin stories. We got Action Comics #1, the very first Superman comic. We also got the movie, Superman 1978, and the limited comic book series, Superman for All Seasons. Now, if you enjoy what you hear this episode, give us a like on our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter at whatisnerd1 with no question mark. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or Google Play. And leave us a rating and review if you are able. Also, check out our sister show, What is Sports? This week we talked about college football. It was a good episode. And finally, if you have any questions or comments, send us an email at winerdcast@gmail.com. Now, unfortunately, our co-host JP is unable to join us today, but that's all right. He told me he loves Superman, and Superman's the best thing ever, and that's all he has to say about that. But Nick, what's your opinion of Superman?
I mean, he's all right. Growing up, I was never really a big... I like superheroes, but I think my main favorite superhero was Batman. Yeah. And, I like Superman. He was cool. He was just like... I don't want to say he was boring because he could do so many things, but it was like you can't defeat him because he is... he's a demigod. Yeah. And so, you know, it was like he's awesome. Like, yeah, he's unstoppable. And you kind of want a guy that he's actually in a tense situation where Superman can say, all right, I got my muscles, got my laser vision, let's go. I'm not saying all that. Basically what I'm trying to say is I wasn't a huge Superman fan, but he's cool. I like him. He's all right.
Where did you know of Superman? How did you become familiar with Superman? Was it... did you ever watch that cartoon series that was on around the same time as the Batman show? How did you know Superman?
He's been around for forever, and you see action figures, and you had TV. I didn't read any comics, but when we were kids, the movies were already out. So you just hear about him, you know about him, and
yeah, because I guess that's why Superman is a little bit of a strange superhero, because a lot of people, everyone knows who Superman is, right? And probably not everyone, but if I ever met someone who didn't know what Superman was, I would think they were like a freak, or at least if they were raised in the United States, at least, because I'm sure that there's some parts of the world that don't know about Superman. It's weird though, because people our age, like people who grew up in the 90s, we had the cartoon that was on WB, but there weren't, Superman movies didn't come out while we were kids, right? They had the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, which we're going to talk about the first one, but I feel like if your parents weren't a fan, then you probably didn't see those movies, right? Did you see those movies as a kid?
Parts of them on TV, but not really.
Now, I wasn't really much of a fan of Superman growing up either. I was more of a Batman and Spider-Man kid. But I think that I started appreciating Superman later. I guess, when did the first Captain America movie, that came out, what year? 2010 or something like that? 2009? While we were in college, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, whenever that Captain America movie came out, I started liking a different type of superhero, the kind who's perfect, basically. And because I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people really liked the Wonder Woman movie, because these are superheroes that are basically perfect, right? And a lot of people find that boring, but I kind of find that interesting.
Well, their abilities and things are perfect, but they still had personal troubles and situations happening. So it wasn't it was in a way saying, yeah, they seem perfect, but they're not, and they were still relatable, which I thought was a huge deal, because you don't want somebody who's perfect, because that's not really relatable.
And that's why I feel like a good Superman story should be about him struggling with something internally.
Right.
And that's why I like Superman for All Seasons, right? The comic series that we're reading. That's why I like that one a lot. But I mean, we'll get into that. First, let's talk about Action Comics 1, right? The very first Superman comic came out in 1938. It was written by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and it was pretty much like one of the first superhero comics as we know it. So what did you think of it? Action Comics number 1.
I mean, it was dated, but I mean that's to be expected. But it wasn't bad. I mean, I thought it was just really fast, kind of like the Batman comics that we read.
Yeah.
It was just really fast, and it was just a very different style of storytelling. I mean, there was a few things that happened. I mean, the story basically is there's Superman and Clark Kent, which we already know. And
it's like Superman saves the guy, or no, he saves a woman who's been like falsely accused of something. But after he performs a heroic task, and you learn that bullets bounce off his chest, and he's super fast, and can jump really high and stuff. Then all of a sudden you see his alter ego Clark Kent, and he's got to act like a wimp, basically, right? He's like hanging out with Lois Lane, and some guy tries to dance with her, and then
so they go on a date, and Clark's like, "Hey, Lois, you remember our date?" And she's like, "Fine." And so they go on a date, and this guy tries to cut in. Well, Clark's like, "Well, I guess it's not a problem." And Lois is like, "Clark's, be a man." And so then she slaps him. Anyways, Clark goes away. They kidnap Lois Lane. Then Superman appears, stops the car they're trying to run away in, shakes them all out of the car, and then sends them to jail or something. It was all right.
Well, and what's funny to me is that, because it starts with Superman, then it goes to Clark Kent, then you get to see him turn to Superman again. And to me, it seems like a perfect, nerd, escape fantasy. Like Clark Kent's some, four-eyed dweeb, and it's like, but what if he was actually a superhero? And so it's just kind of goofy,
Yeah.
But
and one thing I thought was it's not funny, but it struck me as odd is so in this story, when Clark Kent, 'cause he's working at the time, it's called the Daily Star, but
right.
if you know anything about Superman, Clark Kent works at the Daily Planet. So obviously this is the very beginning. Anyways, the main editor says, "Hey Clark, we got a tip that a man's beaten his wife. Why don't you go down there and write a story about it?" and so Clark, he goes in as Superman, beats up the wife beater, and then the cops show up and like, "Oh, we got him," and so he goes to jail and the wife is free. But I thought, who would throw in a tip to a newspaper that somebody's beating their wife?
It's like, instead of calling the cops, she calls the press.
Yeah, I don't know. It was odd. Why that? I mean,
stuff was weird back then though. Because Superman though is very much an old school superhero, right? Back in those days, it was considered interesting to write about a guy who had superpowers. Just that idea made him an interesting character,
Mm-hmm.
And also Action Comics, just like Detective Comics with the Batman, with the first Batman appearances, Action Comics weren't just Superman comics. At first, they had war stories and stuff like that, and detective stories and all that, and cowboy stuff. Right? Did you?
Yeah. I didn't read any of those, but I glanced through them, and it was kind of cool seeing the different style of comics that were out during that time.
Because I guess, obviously at the time, they didn't know that comics would basically just become superhero stuff, and so they kind of stuffed all kinds of things that young boys would enjoy. So anyways, several years later, right, long time later, Superman changed and all that stuff, and stuff was added to his story. Did you notice that at first it talked about Krypton, right, where he came from, and at the time, everyone on the planet were super people, right? Because it said that everyone on Krypton was super powered, and they were just an advanced race basically. But
they said they were their body, physical structure, and everything was million years more advanced than us on Earth.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, because as you know, what is the deal with Superman? Why does Superman have powers on Earth?
Because space travel, I don't really remember or catch.
Well, so the deal with it is that I guess sometimes it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's gravitational differences between Earth and Krypton, so it makes him able to be super strong and jump super high and all that stuff. But other times it's like the radiation from Earth's sun that gives him his powers. But bottom line is on Krypton, it's not full of super people. It's like everyone's just normal there while they're living on that planet, and so sending him to Earth is what made him into a superhero. Yeah, I mean that's it. Kind of gets into that with the movie that we watched. So the 1978 Superman, and I feel like this for a lot of people, I guess especially people who are a little bit older than us, this was their big introduction to Superman. I mean, there was a TV show. Actually, they had like cereals, like where not like breakfast cereals, but like they would like little
Wheaties and
right.
Apple Jacks, and
Super Flakes. You know, before a movie would play in a movie theater, they would have like newsreels or little short films and stuff. And so the short films were called serials, and so that's where like early Batman cartoons, that's where they came from, and they had Superman cartoons as well. And it was basically like the equivalent of, did you ever read like in the funny papers, they would have like Dick Tracy stories, or like they would have like a little Spider-Man story, and it's literally just like a 3-panel comic strip. Did you ever read those?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and so they're kind of the equivalent of those, these little 5 to 10 minute stories. So anyway, Superman had some of those. They had a movie called Superman and the Mole Men, which, look up the trailer for it on YouTube. It's the greatest thing ever. Like
Is it a cartoon or is it live action?
It's live action. It's the very first live action Superman movie, and it looks fantastic in like the worst way. So they had Superman and the Mole Men, and then in the 52, I believe, they came out with the Superman TV series starring George Reeves, which he has a similar name to Christopher Reeve. They're actually unrelated though. But that series lasted for I believe it was 52 to 58. So it lasted for a few years, and then it was off the air by the time the Batman series, the 60s Batman series came around. But it was kind of similar in tone, I guess. I mean, the Batman TV series is really intentionally goofy, and the Superman TV series is not quite intentionally goofy, but it's really dumb and cheesy and stuff. But kind of since then, Superman was kind of off the grid for a little bit, other than the comics, until the 1978 Superman movie, directed by Richard Donner and starring Christopher Reeve. So, was this your first time seeing it all the way through?
Yeah, I mean, definitely from start to finish. Like I said, I've seen parts of it prior to watching it, and I don't know, it felt dated to me. And I'm looking at it with, I've seen these great movies of now, and then looking back, I mean, it was kind of cheesy. I don't think it held up that well.
Yeah, I mean, it came out 78. That was the year after Star Wars. Yeah. So that's kind of a good frame of reference. And I mean, this was 4 years before The Dark Crystal. So with that in mind, the movie still, I agree, the movie still does feel pretty dated. Maybe, I feel like what they were trying to do with the special effects, they were just not able to,
Yeah, and I think part of it too, I think they're trying to do too much with the story.
Yeah, okay.
It was really rushed, but it wasn't bad. I just didn't really care for it too much.
I actually disagree about it being rushed. Because it is a pretty long movie, but let's get into, I guess, what it tells, right? So it tells Superman's origins. We start off with Marlon Brando playing Jor-El in the movie they call it Krypton, which drove me crazy, Planet Krypton. Yeah. And I guess, what is it, like 15 minutes or so of...
Yeah, it's actually pretty long.
Yeah.
It's just, there's this trial, Jor-El, he's on the council, and they send, what's his name, General Zod?
Zod, yeah. They like imprison them in like a album cover.
Pretty much like a flying...
Yeah, like a flying like record through space. And which, like, whenever I saw that, I was like, man, I really hope like a weird like progressive rock band from the 70s like made that their album cover. Like the people just trapped.
That'd actually be pretty cool. Call it General Zod.
But it's funny about that because he does not come back. Like that whole seed, I guess, is just a Easter egg for not an Easter egg, like a teaser, I guess, for the second movie. Mm-hmm. They don't come back at all for the rest of the movie. But yeah, because I guess the General Zod was like part of an uprising and stuff like that, and he was threatening the Kryptonian government and stuff. He wanted to kind of do a hostile takeover, and he's obviously one of the iconic Superman villains, but he doesn't actually come into play until the sequel, Superman 2. So basically, yeah, we get some time with Jor-El, Superman's dad, and he believes that the planet is going to explode, but no one else believes him. Right?
Yeah, that's what I thought was insane. He was even nonchalant about it. He is a council. I'm pretty sure that the planet will be exploding maybe in 30 days, maybe less. I don't know, but the planet will explode. And they'll look at it and go, Jor-El, you're crazy. Get out of here. He's like, no, I'm serious. It's going to explode. And they said, shut up. Go get out of here. Just leave us. He's like, all right.
He should be like, what's wrong with you? The planet's going to blow up.
Yeah. And so he goes,
he didn't even try very hard.
No, and he just goes, well, he gets his wife. He goes, we have our son. Let's put him in these little space crystals and launch him out of here. And it's like, they didn't even escape. So anyways, they shoot Superman out in space. And then the planet, of course, explodes because, I don't know, because
that's
why not?
That's what planets do, man.
They just explode. And anyways, Superman, he crash lands on Earth.
Well, you get baby Superman floating through flying through the galaxy. And he's like listening to his dad on audiobook, explaining the mysteries of the universe and stuff.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then, I guess he's flying for a few years because whenever he lands on Earth, he's like a toddler, right?
Yeah, he's probably a few years old.
He's a smiling, bouncing little boy.
Yeah, he gets picked up by Jonathan and Marianne, and like, hey, it's a baby. They go, it's a baby. They're driving in a truck, and the truck's messed up, and then they're just talking like, what do we do with him? And then they look over, and he's lifting up the truck, and they're like, this is what I thought. I mean, it was kind of weird. I know it's all fiction and fantasy, but they see this kid, he's lifting up a truck, and they go, I think we should adopt this kid. like that's their thought process.
Yeah.
No, that's not normal. I see a kid lifting up a truck, I'm terrified.
Yeah, it's not like he's got like just a weird birthmark or something like that. He is like obviously got superhuman strength, and they're just like, oh, okay, that's cool.
He'll help out around the farm.
Right.
And so, anyways, time passes, and you see a high school Superman or high school Clark Kent, and he can't use his powers, and he's bummed out because he wants to play football, but he's only the water boy.
Well, and so like Pa Kent, he tells him, he says, I know you're brought to this earth to do something, but I know it's not to play football, which I thought was, that's a good point. But he is a teenage. Clark Kent is kind of reckless with his powers anyways, because he's like running by trains and stuff like that,
Yeah, and people are watching like, hey, look, the guy's running really fast, and he's just running around waving at the train, like doesn't even care.
I guess I guess this is recently after Clark's graduation or something like that, or is it his graduation? I'm not sure, but anyway, so Pa Kent dies of a heart attack, and Superman can't save him. Right? Like, he can't do that. He can't save someone from a heart attack. So, of course, this kind of makes him feel like he needs to find himself, like he needs to, figure out who he really is. And so he finds the crystal that was in the spaceship that he came in, and it beckons him to go to the Arctic.
So you got this high school kid who walks all the way to the Arctic, and he has it's like a one jacket and a backpack, and then he's just upset, throws his crystal into the snow, and then the Fortress of Solitude appears, all these crystals, and he walks over to it, and he sees a vision of his dad, and basically trains him to be Superman.
Yeah, because he's 18 at the time, so it trains him for 12 years, and so he wakes up when he's 30, and he's Christopher Reeve now, and he looks like Superman.
he flies on out of there, gets a job at the Daily Planet, And then he has a thing for Lois Lane, which we all know.
So one thing that I really like about the Superman origin story, right? Because we saw this movie and we read For All Seasons, which are two very similar tellings of Superman's origin. And so one of the things I really like about it is he starts off in Smallville, and there's the line in For All Seasons. I think it's it's Pa Kent's like narration in the first issue of the series. He says that he says that Clark has no idea how lucky he was to grow up in a place like Smallville, right? And so it's like you get this guy who comes from humble beginnings, and that's the important thing. And that's why, like, I feel like Superman's origins is by far the most popular and important, part of Superman. Because he comes from this humble beginnings and he moves to the big city. And I feel like that's relatable because, like, it's like high school graduation, right? It's like you graduate from the town and place that you know, then you go off to bigger and better things. And so that's what I like about this movie and All Seasons a lot, because, you get this small town guy who goes to this big old city. You also get so you talked about Lois Lane, right?
Yes.
Who's kind of like... she's much different than the other girl from Smallville, who's barely in the movie, Lana Lang. But that's interesting though that both characters are important, right? Because Lana Lang is like the small town girl and stuff like that from the simple days, and then you get Lois Lane, who's this kind of
hotshot news reporter.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. She's very like ambitious and quippy and. She don't take no nonsense from nobody and stuff like that, and they're so different. Superman, has to put on the disguise of Clark Kent and pretend to be a dweeb, like we said with the Action Comics thing, which I think's pretty funny. That he has to pretend to be awkward and wimpy and stuff like that. Like, because there's the part whenever they get mugged, and he has to like catch the bullet. But then pretend like he passed out because he was scared, right?
Right. That whole scene was funny. It's just because, like you said, the mugger like sticks a gun. I was like, "Hey, you come over here!" And Clark's like, "Who? Me?" He's like, "Yeah, you." And he sticks a gun out in like broad daylight, and he like sticks an index finger out and like beckons them. He's like,
and brings them into the alley.
Yeah. And then Lois like, let's just get out of here. Like, he's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And Clark goes, well, now let's listen to the nice man. Let's go. And then they have that exchange, and it's silly.
Yeah, well, and I think he does that like just to stop the criminal, or at least
probably.
And I mean, because really that's the first crime that he stops, right? And because he doesn't kind of start saving people till a while. Because I believe that you get introduced to Lex Luthor next, who has hair in this one, and at least for this part of the movie, and Lex Luthor has got this super cool underground layer that kind of looks like it's like a flooded subway station or something like that. But
yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah, he's got his sidekicks Otis and what was her name, Miss. Tessmacher, I think.
I don't recall.
Something like that. But, so he's got his henchmen. And what's funny about Lex Luthor in this movie is how comedic he is. He's very much they're keeping the tone light here,
Oh, for sure.
Like, he's a goofball. His henchmen are goofballs.
Well, he says the line about, he says, I can't believe that the world's greatest criminal mind surrounds himself with a putz, and then Otis, his second guy, his main partner, whatever, comes in. He's just a goof.
I'm like, that's your choice, dude.
I know. I thought the same thing. It's like, you don't have to hang out with him.
Well, and so let's talk about before we get to the Superman stuff. Let's talk about Lex Luthor's plan, okay? Because this is kind of revealed slowly throughout the movie, but his plan is absurd. Right? Because he's bought like all this desert land in California. And so his plan is to steal nuclear missiles and launch them at the San Andreas Fault to break off the West Coast from America so that his land is now the new West Coast and he'll be able to sell it.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, if you blow up the actual West Coast, like anyone's going to be trying to buy, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that
Well, he said that, like all the West Coast is some of the hottest and most expensive property in the world.
Yeah.
And so he's saying, well, if we get rid of that West Coast, where this new
There'll
West
be a new
Coast will
one.
be even more expensive.
It's
So-
like you still own in a desert, though. It's not like, okay, the new West Coast would become like Florida or something like that, you know? And I mean, the West Coast is the West Coast because Los Angeles and, like San Francisco.
But yeah, they were
and-
planning on cutting it up and like making Lutherville and stuff like
Right,
that.
like
So
Otisburg and
he had a
stuff.
plan. It wasn't a good plan, but he had a plan.
Because I'm like, you have nuclear missiles. Why don't you, like, hold America hostage or something like that? You know what I'm saying? Like, man.
I don't know, man. It's 78, man. So
Right.
it was a crazy
Well,
time.
And it is, like, that's one thing that I like about this movie, though, is it, like, totally is a comic book movie. Like, they're not ashamed of it. They're like, man, this is a comic booky, weird, goofy movie. Did you know that the screenplay was written by Mario Puzo? Do you know who that is?
I do not.
So he's actually the guy who wrote the Godfather book that the movie's based on. Yeah. So it's like, I have no doubt that, like, the people writing this movie and the people, like, and Richard Donner, has made, in addition to this, some really great movies. And so everyone making these, I feel like, knew exactly what they're making. They're like, let's make this crazy, goofy comic book movie. And that's what it is, right? And so I think that Lex Luthor is a good, and his plan are kind of like a good, signifier of that. But the first time that Superman actually starts saving people is with the helicopter.
Yeah, and I thought this was kind of funny. So Lois Lane, she is in the Daily Planet's helicopter trying to get some news story, and it runs into some cable wires and malfunctions, and is basically hanging on the edge of this skyscraper. And she's about to fall out and fall to her death, and everybody on the ground is flipping out like it's the end of the world. Like, I understand there'd be some crazy like people be scared and panicky, but I feel like it was a little over the top.
See, I don't know why people were hanging out down at the bottom on the street.
Yeah,
I'd be
well,
running
there's all
away.
this,
A helicopter's
stuff.
gonna fall. Get out the way.
Yeah, and they're just running around like lunatics, and then Clark Kent, he walks out of the Daily Planet like, oh, I guess my day's over. And then he sees that the helicopter's there, so he runs, changes real quick, and then saves Lois Lane, and she falls in love with him. And
Yeah, and so the bit that they did whenever he was fixing to change, and he looked at the payphone, right? The way that, like, the way that Superman would change his clothes often in the old TV series back in the 50s was in phone booths. But yeah, he looks and it's a payphone, not a phone booth. So he's got to go through the revolving door, which is like, I feel like even weirder than changing in a phone booth. You know,
I mean, you
like,
could change in an alley or something.
Yeah, instead he runs really fast in circles and changes while he's running in a revolving door. And like the guy like sees him, he's like, "Hey man, nice clothes." And Superman flies off and saves Lois Lane from the helicopter, and then he kind of goes on like a saving people spree, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And this is my favorite part of the movie, because you're like, yeah, man, I'm watching Superman right now. He's going around saving people and stopping crimes and all that, and he literally rescues a cat from a tree and all that stuff. Like, so, I don't know, whenever I'm watching this, I'm like, man, I love this. This is, like, a superhero movie. You know?
Yeah, it's not bad. And then he goes on a date with Lois Lane, basically, and she writes a story about him. And Lex Luthor, he realizes that Superman's trying to, he's going to be in his way. So how does he find out that kryptonite hurts him?
It's really fast because he basically sees that a meteorite has landed, and so Superman told Lois Lane that his home planet had exploded in the interview, and which is weird because Superman is very open about talking about his superhero stuff. But then, of course, he doesn't reveal, his other identity
Right,
and
yeah.
Smallville and all that stuff. But so Lex Luthor is like, okay, well, if a planet exploded and these meteorites came, these meteorites are probably from this planet, right? And so the meteorite is kryptonite. And he basically just kind of assumes that, hey, if this is chunks from his planet, it'll be radioactive towards him, which is a bit of a leap. But whatever. I guess he's supposed to be like the
I gotta
smartest
say,
guy on
I do
Earth.
like his thought process on that, because that's one thing I always wonder is like, how do these people keep getting kryptonite?
Yeah.
Like, it's just ridiculous. But if it's in a meteorite, falls on Earth, yeah, it makes a lot of sense
it
in a
kind of
weird
does
way.
make sense. And so that he lures Superman to his lair with like a high pitched frequency message or something like that.
Which again, I thought was really smart, because only
Yeah.
Superman could hear it.
Yeah.
But then this part was just kind of
When he does the Crash Bandicoot spin through the floor and gets into
he does like this weird spin to like drills himself down to Lex Luthor's lair, and basically they're just talking, and Lex Luthor tells Superman everything about the plan that we already mentioned a little while ago about making the new West Coast and everything. And Superman goes like, well, I guess I got to stop you. And then basically Lex says, hey, man, here's kryptonite. We'll put it around your neck, and you will be hanging out in this pool for a few hours.
Yeah, and then also, which I didn't get this, but so apparently Lex Luthor launched another missile heading the opposite direction, and which I'm very confused about the geography of Metropolis.
Me too.
Like, I have no idea where it's supposed to be,
I
because
always thought it was New York. Is it not New York?
who knows? Like, no, it can't be New York, because it's obviously, so in this movie, it's got to be close to California, because while this is happening, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, the photographer guy, the little photographer kid, they go to the desert that Lex Luthor has bought in California to talk to people about why is somebody buying up all this real estate here. And so, because they're in California whenever the San Andreas Fault splits, so obviously, Metropolis can't be too far away from California, but it's like, I don't know, it makes zero sense, because the other missile is going eastward towards Hackensack, New Jersey, which I don't know why Lex Luthor picked that town in particular, but it turns out that Miss Tessmacher's mom lives there. So she frees Superman from the kryptonite so that he can go stop that missile and save her mom. And so it's like it should be that Metropolis should be right in the middle of America, right? Like, it should be in Kansas or something like that.
Yeah. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but anyways, when he does that, the missile hits the San Andreas Fault line, and all hell breaks loose. And
this part's wild too. Like, he flies through the core of the Earth to lift up the San Andreas Fault again to fix it. He like stops the Hoover Dam from bust. Oh no, Hoover Dam busts. He re-dams it though with a bunch of rocks.
Yeah, a bunch of trees. And while he does that though, Lois Lane, like Deet said, is driving around, and her car falls into a fault line, and she's basically sinking. And by the time Superman gets to her, she's dead. And so what does he do? He kisses her, which was weird.
Kissing a dead person. People do that all the time in movies. I don't get why.
She's dead, and he kisses her on the lips, and he's like, no! And so then, in an attempt to rescue her, he starts flying around the world the reverse way that the Earth's rotating, and starts spinning the opposite way, and so time goes backwards.
Yeah, because just like in Star Trek, all you have to do is go around something really fast to travel back in time.
Right, so he goes back in time. He's able to save Lois Lane, and then he gets Lex Luthor and Otis and drops them.
Hold on. Okay, we can't move past this yet, because this literally doesn't make sense, because he traveled back in time, and there is no cracks in the road anymore.
Yeah, I didn't get that either.
Like the missiles were never launched, and the San Andreas Fault never was crushed. How did going back in time change that?
You know what? This is a superhero movie made
So
in
literally no
'78. I
sense.
think they said, you know what? Let's not get too, let's not too much effort into the time travel thing. Let's
Yeah,
just
it's
kind of
like,
go
who
as
cares?
is. Yeah, it didn't make sense. So if he went back in time, he still would have had to stop the missiles, but he didn't have to this time because he already did. It was weird. Doesn't make sense.
So I actually got a little bit of background info on this because the movie was directed by Richard Donner, and it was basically made at the same time, or Superman 2 was made right after this, and this ending where Superman traveled back in time was actually supposed to be at the end of Superman 2. And I'm not sure why they moved it to the end of this movie, but it does feel out of place,
Oh, for sure.
Like, it should have just been he could have just somehow gone through the core of the Earth and, gotten there in time to save her. Like, it seems like that this ending just didn't make any sense. And, because I like this movie a lot, and I like that parts of it don't make sense, but this thing really bothers me. That, you can, I don't know, that it just literally didn't make sense. Like, he traveled back in time, and then the, San Andreas fault was fine. But I'm not going to get too hung up on it. It's a Superman movie.
Yeah, he goes back in time, saves Lois Lane, and then he gets Lex Luthor and his henchman Otis and drops him off in a prison. And then Lex Luthor reveals that he was wearing a wig the whole time.
Oh, yeah, he is bald.
Yeah, and so it was kind of like, all right, that was a kind of a pointless twist, I guess, if you're going to call it that. But that's how it ends. That's the movie. And, like I said, I just felt it was kind of dated, and I mean, it was all right. I'm kind of indifferent about it. But
Yeah.
one thing I do feel pretty strong about, I do think that Christopher Reeve was a fantastic Superman and
yeah.
Clark Kent. Like,
Yeah.
he was awesome. He was definitely what made the movie. Just
Yeah.
his portrayal of Clark Kent and Superman, I thought he was great.
Yeah, he's perfect. Well, and what's weird about Clark Kent is that I especially felt it in this movie where, he's Superman acting like someone else.
Right.
And so, like, I don't know, this movie kind of makes you, it strikes you how weird that is, that, he's pretending to be someone he's not, like, most of the time. He's pretending to be a different person. And so I think that, so they had the part where after the interview, right, where Superman has the interview with Lois Lane, and then he picks her up and takes her flying around the city and stuff, and then after he drops her off, he switches to Clark Kent and knocks on the door, and now he's like all talking in a high voice and acting all awkward and stuff. But then she walks over to the next room, and he drops the act for like a second, and his voice gets deep again, like he's thinking about telling her who he is and all that. And I don't know, it's just cool. Like, it's like you said, he was really good as both.
No, for sure.
Now, the other Superman movies, like Superman 2, I think is a lot of fun. What's weird about Superman 2 is that Richard Donner directed most of the movie, but he was fired from it, and so they got a different dude, Richard Lester, to finish it.
A different Richard?
Yeah, different Richard.
Was Little Richard not available?
No, Little Richard was not, unfortunately. Richard Pryor was in Superman 3, though.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah. But Superman 3 is terrible. Superman 3 and 4 are awful. But anyways, they do have two different versions nowadays of Superman 2. They have the original cut and the Donner cut. And I can't remember which one I saw, because I was like looking up differences online, and I couldn't remember good enough to remember which one I watched. But it's a good movie. Superman 2 is a good movie. I mean, it's fun. It's a lot cheesier than this one. So if you thought that if the cheesiness of this one bothered you, I don't know, Superman 2 might be like really bad to you.
Well, I didn't think it was cheesy. It just felt, it was little, but it just felt really dated.
Yeah, I mean, that's Superman. Of course, we all know that nowadays we have the Batman vs. Superman, which is one of the worst movies that I've ever seen. And I think that Superman is probably screwed for a while, as far as
Because he's tied to that movie.
Yeah. So R.I.P. Superman. But anyways, at least in movies, because next up, I guess our last thing, which we probably won't take too long to cover this, but Superman for All Seasons, which is a 4-issue comic book series. Also tells Superman's origin, sort of his origin story. It's basically his first year on the job. Starts off with him graduating high school, and then goes into him moving to Metropolis, becoming Superman, and encountering Lex Luthor in the beginning. So what did you think of Superman for All Seasons?
I thought it was all right. Like we said just a little while ago, the main thing is it's Superman trying to hide as Clark Kent, basically. Mm-hmm. In this, the way that the Superman's drawn, I feel like it's obvious that Clark Kent is Superman. Superman is so huge in this thing, like he towers over everybody. And then Clark Kent obviously looks the same, just with glasses on. Like, how does nobody not put two and two together that Clark Kent is Superman? Because nobody else is that big. Nobody. And like everybody's like, oh, Clark's just this little goof. And I'm like, no, man, he's freaking Superman. It's obvious. Anyways, so that kind of
it's like whenever, so if like you ever watch like a movie where Arnold Schwarzenegger's supposed to play like a regular guy, like Jingle All the Way or something like that, and it's like, dude, why do you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like, why are you like, massive if you're just like a regular guy with like a regular job?
He's like, I'm a chef.
Right.
It's like, no,
I'm
you're
just
not.
a regular dad.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it wasn't bad. I think, the story was pretty short and simple. Basically, it was Superman dealing with some inner turmoil, and that was nice. But I didn't really connect with it, honestly. And Lois Lane, she was just a turd in these series. Like, she was just rude, and like, normally I understand her being kind of spunky and like, Clark, you're a dweeb, but she was just a turd. Like, through the last 2 issues, and I was like, come on, Lois, have a heart. But I don't know, it was all right. It wasn't a huge fan of it.
This comic is so good, man. I can't believe that you weren't like all the way on board with it.
Well, I mean, Superman's 5-foot chin kind of like took me out of it too.
Well, I mean, okay, so what I really like about this one, right, is that it makes, and so there's three versions of Superman, basically, right? So there's Clark Kent in Smallville, right? And so that's who Superman really is, that's his true self. And like, because in the movie, right, the real Superman was the guy in the costume, right? And the fake part was Clark Kent at the Daily Planet. But then in this comic, it kind of shows that, okay, the guy in the costume isn't the real Superman either. He's actually just like a kind of a sensitive guy, basically, who's kind of aware that he's different, and he's aware that he sticks out like a sore thumb. And so I think that's kind of why he's drawn like that, because it's like, even if you didn't know that he was a superhero, he doesn't blend in, like there's something different about him, even if he tries to hide it. And so I like that that's basically what this is about, right? About him kind of figuring out who he is.
Yeah.
And so he goes, and I mean, it's very much like I feel like it's kind of like an American Dream type story. Like, he goes from his small town, humble beginnings, to basically making the decision to move to Metropolis after he graduates. And he's also kind of coming to terms with his powers and learning how to use them and all that stuff. Like, he learns how to fly, for example. And of course, Lana Lang is in this one a lot more. And like, I think that the comics do a good job at comparing her to Lois.
Yeah, and I felt the comics, I know I said I wasn't really a huge fan of it. There were things I did like. I liked that they spent more time on his backstory a little bit, and him being from the small town.
Yeah.
And Clark Kent hanging around his old friends from high school.
Yeah.
I like that, and the relationship building that.
Yeah, and like
happened.
the idea with, because it really reminded me of like whenever, because they had the friend, what was the, Peter Ross,
mm-hmm.
who he's there. He was friends with Clark and Lana back in Smallville, and he was like the guy who was like, yeah, I want to get out of this stinking town and all that
He
stuff.
kept saying like, I want $1 million, and I can't wait to leave.
Yeah, except he didn't do anything about it, right? He stayed behind, and
Right.
and so that reminded me a lot of like, you know, whenever you, it's like whenever you visit your hometown and you run into someone that you knew back in high school, and they're just like, you know, working at some local business and all that stuff, and it's just like, oh yeah, I guess things don't really change that much, you know, if you stay in the same place. And
Right.
so,
But still, I mean, he was kind of upset that he was just mad that he never left, but he made it a good life for himself.
right, yeah,
And so it was like, you know, you wanted to leave and do these things, but you still are doing pretty good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what ends up happening, I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I believe that he and Lana end up getting married, like in some of the continuities of Superman, and so it's like life doesn't always turn out the way that you want or the way that you hope, but sometimes like that's still not a bad thing, right? Sometimes, you know, life can surprise you.
Right.
And then then you get kind of him, Clark, using like learning about being Superman. You know, Lex Luthor is like this, and this is the Lex Luthor that I'm more familiar with versus the Gene Hackman one from the movie, where he's like this super rich business guy who's kind of he basically owns Metropolis, and he's jealous that Superman's getting attention now. And this is why he wants to take Superman down. And also because Superman is not kind of letting him
Do his criminal activities. He's you know, sticking his nose where it shouldn't belong.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Lex Luthor can't be as greedy and shady as he wants to be.
Yeah.
And so then that's when he kind of builds his own police force, where it's like robots that can fly and everything, that are trying to make Superman obsolete.
And they kind of end up doing more harm than good,
right,
like in some ways. Yeah, and so, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of it. Well, okay, no, because he actually gets defeated by Lex Luthor with the... he doesn't get defeated, but Lex Luthor's plan with the poison and stuff ends up causing someone to die, right? Someone who's trying to help. That she called herself Toxin, but that lady that Superman saved, who was helping her like spread the cure to this illness that Lex Luthor spread, and of course Lex Luthor engineered it so that she would die in the process, and he was hoping to crush Superman's drive, I guess, and it kind of works, right? So Superman kind of doubts himself, and he goes back to Smallville.
He hangs out with his family and friends, and just kind of, you know, gets a new outlook on life, and he's just trying to find himself too, for the most part. And then a big flood comes, and he saves a lot of people, and everybody's thankful that Superman was there, and he realizes, no, I need to go back and save people and make a difference. And so after all his reflection, he gets the strength, the inner strength, to go back to Metropolis and kind of battle out with Lex. They don't fight in the comic, but you know, he knows, I need to stand my ground and be a protector for this community.
It's like the stage is set for the rest of the series basically now. And so I like this comic series a lot. Like, actually, out of all the comics that we've done, I'd say this is my second favorite to Watchmen. Just because I feel like, even though it's a Superman story, it makes me feel like I can relate to Superman, and it kind of takes me back to like college era, or like after high school graduation. Like, you know, if I, you know, this would be like a good, like, I would buy this for somebody who's graduating who's graduating high school, because I feel like it kind of captures that moment in time pretty well.
Yeah, I agree, and like you said, it definitely makes Superman feel more relatable. And like I said, I did like certain parts of it. I didn't just think it was ridiculous or anything. I liked it fine. I guess maybe I was hoping for some more action or something, and there really wasn't a whole lot of that.
Yeah, it is a bit more kind of like chill.
Yeah, it is. And, I mean, it wasn't bad. It was a nice, relatively quick read, and I mean, I guess I'd recommend it.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I liked that it made him relatable, and it showed more of his the community that helps raise Clark.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought was pretty neat. I liked that part of it.
Yeah, it's just he's got that chin though.
Man, like that's the first thing I thought and I texted Dietz this. I was looking at it and it's like, man, he's supposed to be 18. He looks 37, like a jacked wrestler from like the WWE, and like it made zero sense.
Yeah.
And then of course he goes to Metropolis, and he looks just like Superman, like the same build, and nobody puts two and two together. I'm like, come on, people, it's not that hard. I mean, I know that it's Superman, but it's so obvious. But.
Well, and I liked how this one and the movie, Lois Lane has that moment where she's like, Clark Kent, Superman, nah, you know, like pretty much the same thing happens in both of them. But yeah, that's Superman for all seasons, and I feel like the kind of doing this stuff, I feel like is a good introduction to Superman overall. Nick, do you feel like that you kind of know a bit more about Superman and all that stuff now?
I do. I kind of wish that we did something that dealt with another one of his villains, because I feel like it's Superman and Lex Luthor. I feel like we should have. Yeah, I've seen it. That's what you're familiar with, and it would have been kind of nice to maybe see him battle out against another villain or two.
We could do. I mean, because obviously, you got General Zod, who obviously is that's the villain of Superman 2, and of course, like Man of Steel, right? That movie wasn't that great, but I think that maybe if we ever cover Superman in the future, we could do like a Brainiac storyline or like Bizarro Superman or something like that, because I feel like that Superman's origin is something that a lot of people are very familiar with, but there's a bunch of other stories that people don't know so much.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, I liked reading about his beginnings and everything like that. So I mean, it was good. I mean, I think it's a great place to start learning about Superman, and I mean, it's definitely worth something checking out if you're into superheroes.
Well, and one other, so I'd thought about having us do this other origin story Superman comic series called Superman Birthright. It's really good, but it's 12 issues long, whereas For All Seasons was only 4 issues. I figured Birthright would be too much for us to do in one episode, because that's about as long as Watchmen, honestly. It's really good, though. If Nick, if you're ever itching for Superman, or any listeners out there are interested in checking out a really cool origin story, like retelling, Superman Birthright is my personal recommendation. But I think that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. Next week, we're talking about the Japanese Superman, Goku, Dragon Ball Z. Yeah.
Also known as Kakarot. Oh man, I'm so excited. I used to watch Dragon Ball Z a lot growing up, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, I know you're the biggest Dragon Ball Z fan of the two of us. I was never super into it, but I'm down for the D, down to dig into the D.
You probably shouldn't say that.
But you can quote me on that.
No, I will not.
Down for the D. But anyways, we'll get to that next time. We're going to be talking about the beginning of the show, mostly the Saiyan saga.
Man.
Yeah, we're not watching the whole thing. Doesn't those words just take you back, though, the Saiyan saga?
Yes, because so growing up, I started watching the show when I was in, 3rd grade. So there's a lot of nostalgia for me. And so I'm just really looking forward to watching some more episodes that I've seen, several times already. But looking forward to really talk about it and get all excited while you guys think I'm crazy. But it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, it'll be a good time. But so we're not watching all the episodes of the Saiyan saga. I've kind of made an abridged cut of some of the essential episodes. And so I'll list those off of which episodes we're specifically covering on the show. But we are doing Dragon Ball Z Kai, which is like the remastered version. It's got some filler removed. Anime Reddit told me that's the way to go for Dragon Ball Z rewatches. So that's what we're doing. Stay tuned for that on Facebook and Twitter. If you don't follow us on those platforms, please do so to stay in the loop with the show. Of course, I'll also include that in the show notes as well whenever we do that episode. In the meantime, though, that does it for this week. We will see you guys next Friday on What is Nerd?